This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Housing alone will never solve homelessness, but community will. This is John Calloway, the Executive Director of Mission Waco. Welcome to It Takes a Village with Creekside Community Village, where we will discuss Mission Waco's newest project, Creekside Community Village, the most talked about neighborhood in Waco. This transformational development combines permanent supportive housing with life-giving community engagement. I hope you'll join us along this journey as we hear from stakeholders involved in helping make this dream a reality. All right, welcome to the fourth episode of It Takes a Village with Creekside Community Village. My name is John Calloway. I get to serve as the Executive Director of Mission Waco, which is sort of the bigger organization that is trying to pull off Creekside Community Village. I've got some awesome guys with me here today.
I'm inclined to agree.
Confident and lots of humility. Just kidding.
That's what everyone says about me.
Yep.
Introduce yourself and what's your favorite color or whatever you'd like to say about how often you shave your head.
Oh,
Or
gosh.
because these are the serious life questions before we jump in.
Yeah.
Who do we have with us today?
So I am Reverend Dr. Malcolm Foley. I work at Baylor. I'm special advisor to the president for equity and campus engagement, but I'm also a co-pastor of Mosaic Waco.
Okay, awesome.
And your head story?
How often do I shave my head?
Yeah.
I should shave it more often.
It's been a few days.
I get cut every two weeks, basically.
Okay.
It's important. It's important.
it's really-
My name is Slim Thompson, and a pastor at Mosaic Waco, where I co-pastor with Malcolm, where we planted in 2019, and that is only title I think I have besides the other things.
It's
that
not quite as impressive as his
I-
title, but we can
But
create
it goes
something
back to my
for you.
humility.
I'm bivocational. It's only because I'm bivocational. Slim's
Because you have
full-time.
17 jobs, so you have 17 titles.
Trivocational, however many jobs it is. It's fine.
And the Lord took my hair to heaven many years ago.
Wow.
Went on years ahead of me before
You
I go.
are
When I go to glory, we'll be reunited.
One day. One day.
Look, man. If I let my hair grow out, I look like an old man, and then people think I'm in my 50s.
Well,
so
Like
I
me.
don't know.
Between the
getting
gray,
there.
I'm there. It's like I'm 41, but I feel 50, and I definitely look 50.
This is what we're
So-
talking about today, yes?
Oh, yeah, let's keep going. All right, so how did y'all two meet? What's kind of the origin story of you two? Was there like a eHarmony for pastors?
Yes.
Is that how you met on the
Yes.
internet?
No, I'm a big
Slim, you tell the
comic book
story.
fan, and so I love an origin story. So it was dark, it was raining, I was down an alley.
Sounds like somewhere in Waco.
Coming out of a movie with your parents.
Yes. And then this guy ripped my mom's pearls. Anywho, I was pastoring another church here in Waco for 10 years or so, and Malcolm had come to Baylor for his dissertation to do his doctorate, and he stumbled into our church, and I met him one Sunday, but then like that following Saturday, there was so I just, it was just more of like a hello, greetings, but then that following Saturday, my wife and I, Kristen, parked at UBC, was hosting a Black Lives Matter conference, and so we parked, got out, and then Malcolm was walking right by next to us. We're like, oh, hey, let's go into this together. And it was like the beginning of a friendship, as C.S. Lewis talks about friendship, is like you too? You're interested in this too? You care about this thing too? And so it was just kind of like, it began this friendship. And over time, we were working together, thinking through, hey, let's do a racism in the church class, or Divided by Faith, as we walked through that book. Christian Smith and the other guy.
Michael Emerson.
The Rice professor, or at least
Yes.
he used to be at Rice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we
Sociologist.
led a class at our church there for that, and then we planted Mosaic after that. Yeah.
And when was that? What year?
So
And where?
2018, we started working towards it, and then we kicked off our first service in March of 2019 in East Waco in our house across
That's right,
the
yeah.
river. And we had 6 months under our belt before COVID hit. We had moved over to the Bledsoe Miller Community Center, and then to J.H. Hines, and then COVID hit, and then everything shut down, and we were house church for a long time, online church, and then we did the drive-in church, which is a fun way to do church. And I still kind of like, oh, those were fun days. Also, completely exhausting. And at the end of it, I was like, I don't know if I can keep going.
And then, outside in July,
yes.
no church is sustainable.
It was a lot.
Except if you're Jimmy Doral in Church Under the Bridge. And
I know. I'm like, I can't complain because there's churches that I'm very close to that do that. But then someone said, hey, would you guys want to use the Myers Center? And it was like, oh, across the river? I don't know if we can do that. But we had one faithful elder, Shirley Langston, who is a rock star in the community, said, Slim, go there. Yeah. I think she didn't want to sit in the heat in July.
Please get us in the AC. Even if it's the AC of the Myers Center, which works about half the time.
Exactly.
Well, so Myers Center, if you don't know, if you're listening, is sort of Mission Waco's one-stop shop for those who are unhoused in our community. Yeah. And it's been with Mission Waco, I think, more than 20 years, probably 25 years, that we've had as sort of that one-stop shop place. So how in the world, Malcolm, did you get to Waco?
I came to do my PhD. So, and this is actually its own story because I had no intention to go to Waco to do my to go to Baylor to do my PhD. I wanted to go to either Yale or Notre Dame to do work on the early church actually. But it turns out that I had a professor when I was doing my Master of Divinity at Yale. I had a professor who came from Yale to come to Baylor to teach. That's what first got Baylor on my radar. So I applied, and through some circumstances, which included one of my professors at Yale basically sabotaging my PhD applications. Oh, Baylor ended up being my only option for a PhD. And I wanted to do a PhD in theology, but I was taken into the history of Christianity. All of this set a trajectory for me in my life that I never could have foreseen, but one that has turned out kind of much better than anything that I could have ever imagined. So, so I'm really thankful. That the Lord closed those other doors and brought me to Baylor and ultimately to Waco.
So you've both been at Mosaic now for how long? As co-pastors?
Well,
the
6
years of the church. Yeah.
So 6 years at Mosaic. Talk to me, share with us a little bit about what are some of the core values of Mosaic, especially as you were forming a church and what you were trying to figure out and prayerfully consider. What's the values that God is emplacing in our community? I think I just made that word up, emplacing. Imparting, rather, in our community as a church body. What are some of those values, and how do you see that lived out, really?
Yeah, I mean, when we planted, when we started, I think we had 11 teen values or more.
Slim was in classic church planner mode.
And I was like, here we got.
Here are all the things.
I was like, let's have 3.
But we planted with myself, my wife, Malcolm, his wife Desiree, a man named Lawrence, and Diane, and the 3 of us together. We said, hey, let's come to these together. And so we whittled it down to 3 values: gospel-centered, multicultural, and spirit-led. And why those 3 things? I feel like scriptures are constantly pointing us to Jesus and the work and worth and his glory and supremacy. And then the multicultural is something we were like, man, I feel like this is something that we are starting to feel at our last church of going like, I want to see the church start to look more like its neighborhood and more like the kingdom of where we're going. But what all the sociologists say is true, that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is still the most segregated hour. Yeah. This is Martin Luther King, this is Billy Graham, and it's still true to this day. And so what can be done about that? And so we're trying to, let's intentionally build it that way. And then spirit-led was a value that we were like, we coming from a more liturgical tradition. We're like, this might be more aspirational, just like multicultural.
I can't spell the word spirit.
Father, Son, and Holy Scriptures.
Father who? What?
To speak to the multicultural element, in the first few days of the church, the language of multi-ethnic kept coming up, and one of the things in our conversations, one of the things that I wanted to press is that you can have a multi-ethnic church that is still monocultural. Especially in American churches, when you have a number of multi-ethnic spaces, it can still be a place where European cultural norms are still dominant. That's still the kind of the dominant culture of the church, and this is especially true in multiracial churches. And so one of the things that we wanted to emphasize from the beginning is that we want the congregation to constantly be exposed to different cultures to the extent that like everyone should be uncomfortable at some point. That's one element of it. But we also wanted equity and power sharing to be present in the leadership of the church, so that people could see multiracial leadership in an equitable way. Mm-hmm. Also a common trend in a number of multiracial churches is you've got like a white senior pastor, and then you've got basically a black kind of associate pastor or whatever. So in those dynamics, people are like, oh, okay, well, there are black people in leadership, but we know who's really in charge. For us, we wanted it to be clear to the congregation from the very beginning that we are co-pastors. Like there is no senior pastor at Mosaic. And one of the reasons why our co-pastorship, I think, works as well as it does is because neither of us has any ambition to be a senior pastor. And so this is, I think, one of the unique things about me and Slim's relationship is that there is a complete absence of competition. Mm-hmm. Which is I think a rarity in any leadership kind of in any kind of leadership positions, but I think it's one of the reasons why we can care for our community in the way that we do.
How have you seen the church grow? What have been some of the joys and the sort of the beautiful aspect of being truly multicultural? And what are a couple of the things that have been challenges that y'all are growing into as you get bigger as a church?
Yeah, I mean, usually when people think of growth, they'll think of the, budgets, and what's the other one? There's always something that goes along with that.
Always, other pastors used to say nickels and noses.
Yeah, nickels and noses. And so we have grown numerically, went from our house to, again, the Meyer Center, and that's encouraging always. I think healthy things grow, so that's encouraging. But in terms of like what I'm proud of and seeing is the growth and seeing, people like some of our elders who are going like, I just have never been in a community that is constantly, talking about the issues of the day and saying, how does the gospel apply to this issue? And going like 80% of the Old Testament is dealing with justice. And it's not as if these churches are not are preaching against it. They're just not talking about it, that they've grown up in. And so I think seeing the growth in our leadership as well as in our congregation of going like, this is something you're proud of, you're thankful for. Malcolm might say more on it, but I think he shared with me early on when we planted this book called The Elusive Dream by Dr. Corey Edwards, and why, what's the subtitle, like why
it's just the power of race in multiracial churches.
Yeah, and basically just like why it's really difficult to do multiracial church. And because you have all these different cultures coming together, and there's that competition for the white normativity or the one way of doing things. And so I think that is something that I use the illustration of a rubber band that like if we are intentional, we will intentionally move into being multicultural. But the minute we let go, there's always like what's normal? What's the comfortable way of doing it? Which is very different for everyone else. So you're not actually considered other people when you think that way. And so I think anytime that we relax, I think that always happens. So I think that's just like, I think it's not like we've ever arrived. I feel like we make 2 steps forward, 1 step back all the time. Sure.
When I think of growth, I think of maturity. Yep. And I feel like my wife and I happened to be there the day that Shirley Langston, who's an elder, longtime member, was sort of sent off, and there were tears, not just from you, but from people that had been a part of the church. There's this level of authentic, life-giving, genuine community. That is growth, because when somebody leaves that, there's a part of your body that's leaving, and there's a grieving process but it's also this beautiful picture of this is deep community. These are real relationships with real people who look and think and act very different from one another. And so to think that somebody could leave with that much pain, as hard as it is, to me, that's phenomenal. That's a profound statement of what community is.
One of the things that, at least for me, the way that growth kind of shows up in my mind is, I mean, over the course of the last 5 years, we've been through a lot as a nation and as a world, but I've told the congregation on a few occasions, like I know pastors who have been thrown out of their churches for saying some of the things that they've said, particularly in calling people to live in the way that Christ has called them to live. And I am deeply, deeply thankful every single day for a congregation where I know that I can preach the word and tear down people's idols, and the response is not get Malcolm out of the pulpit. The response is, well, that's what Jesus says. Well, let's figure out how to do that. Like I don't take that for granted at all, because I know of folks where they have tried that kind of thing and essentially been silenced. And so I mean, I'm regularly thankful for the Lord's grace in the shaping of this particular community.
Well, and it even sounds like the way you describe community is how I envision the vernacular to shape what community is at a Creekside Community Village. It will be very different people all coming together to figure out what it means to live intentional lives in community for the mess that it creates. I think of so many of folks probably even listen to this that live in a suburban context, perhaps, who, they go home, they drive into their garage, they're with their family, they'll live 10 years next to somebody who they don't even know their name. And I don't think God designed us to live that way with the people that we live next to. So when I think about the growth of Mosaic, what it's grown into, I am still dumbfounded as to why in the world would this church think that its first building campaign should be for somebody else. Walk me through. It doesn't make any sense, but walk me through how did y'all get there as a congregation? What was the thought and prayer process of knowing that you need a building? Because it's hard renting a building from us when the air conditioners don't work, right? But walk me through kind of the initial, this popped up in our hearts, maybe collectively or with a couple people, and then how did it get to where it was, and what was that process like?
I mean, even the framing of the question is interesting, because it, like you say it as though it sounds like a ridiculous thing, and to me, it's just exceedingly obvious. Like it's much more important. It's much more important for my resources to be used to meet the needs of others than it is for me to, when we say that Mosaic needs a building. I mean, we have one. We rent one. We have it. It gives us in many senses what we need. But when I can say this personally, when I heard that Mission Waco was doing this, my first thought was, this is really obviously something that we need to do, and it's something that we as a community, something that we as a church community need to be willing to do. I'm about to preach because Pentecost is Sunday, and the four things that mark the church are commitment to the apostles' teaching, prayer, the breaking of bread, and the fellowship, koinonia, which is specifically the sharing of goods. It's that when the Holy Spirit descended on this community and shaped them into a community, what it meant was one of their fundamental commitments was meeting the needs of the needy in their midst. Like that's just perhaps one of the most significant witnesses of the church is supposed to be its economic witness. And so when I saw particularly this project, I was like, this is a really, really easy way for us to just be obedient to the Lord. Two of the primary things that folks need just to be able to think are housing and food. And in seeing this, I was just like, this is a very concrete way that I can tell this congregation, look, this is a way that you can be obedient to the Lord. You can whatever the Lord has given you in excess of what you need is meant to meet the needs of others. Here's a very specific way in which you can meet the needs of others. And so I remember going to the elder meeting with this kind of pitch, and I was
It didn't quite sound like a pitch as much as it does a demand.
Yeah, basically. I mean, that's how they know. They know this is
if
why.
we are Christian,
they know this is why. Well, I mean,
then-
like, and I have, but that was also the kind of confidence that I came into this meeting with. As I was like, there's not actually a way for you to argue with me when I make this point.
And there was no argument. There was no argument.
And there wasn't one. But
Except, Pastor, we don't have any money in the bank account.
Right.
Well, and when we started talking amounts and stuff, there were some of us who were more reticent about some of the amounts that were thrown out. And to that, my response was, look, if we agree that this is one of the most important things that we can do with our resources, then let's give the Lord an opportunity to work a miracle through us. If there is anything that I ought to feel confident about asking the Lord for, it ought to be equip me to be able to serve my brothers and sisters and neighbors in this way. So I wanted to encourage us to let the Lord work a miracle. I think one of the reasons why we don't see often see miracles is because we don't live in such a way that makes the Lord do those kinds of things. We are because our economy essentially teaches us to just seek to be self-sufficient in all things. We never actually depend on one another. We never actually ask for help, and thus we never actually are trained to share. And those are some of the most important things that we can do, especially as Christians.
Well, is that why maybe you think that when I framed the question of you're crazy for thinking this, it's because the models that I've been given that I grew up in was that. It was not this, right?
Yeah.
So I've been shown a way of doing church in a community that way looked more insular than it did of like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so when I think about those with more than enough and those with less than enough, both learning to live with enough means that those with more than enough need to give to those with less than enough.
Yeah.
And not as transactional as I'm making it sound, because while somebody does need something and I have something, that also can very much enter into a paternalistic view.
I wrote a book about
that. You have this book out here. Would you like to make your plug?
Sure. Yeah. So the book is.
I'll take 5% royalty fees on whatever is sold for this podcast.
The book is called The Anti-Greed Gospel: Why the Love of Money is the Root of Racism.
This is where we need the soundtrack, right? The sound effects.
The Anti-Greed Gospel: Why the Love of Money is the Root of Racism. And my publisher just added another part of the subtitle on Amazon where it says, "A Christian Historian Resists Racial Capitalism." But that's the book. But to that,
couldn't come up with a shorter title.
I know, right? It just tells you what the book's about.
It's like Puritan.
I don't need to read the book now.
Yeah. But the point that you make about generosity and solidarity is an important one, because it's not just a matter of those who have more than enough giving to those who have less than enough. It's a matter of recognizing, hey, look, when I see my brothers and sisters and neighbors, not only might I have something that they need, and thus I have responsibility to give, but they have something I need too. Like that's what solidarity is. That's one of the ways that you battle against the paternalism, because the paternalism assumes, well, I just have something they need, and so let me give to them, and then I can move away from them.
Right.
But the example that we're given in Christ in the incarnation is that he doesn't just give to us and then leave. He becomes one of us. And lives life alongside us in order to share everything that he has with us. Yeah. And so that's supposed to be the paradigm through which we think about all the resources that we have. And so when this project popped up, I was just like, this it's a no-brainer.
And I
Well,
think
go ahead.
I was going to say I think our church. I don't know if it's probably not unique. I think everyone in every church who's kind of been in a well air conditioned building, and then you gave your tithe or whatnot, and you're like, is it going to the AC? And sometimes, although when you don't have it, you're like, "Ooh, I wish the tithe went to the AC." But sometimes there's the moments when you're like, "Is this really worth it? Is this really worth the sacrifice of the offering and things like that?" But knowing our people, I felt like it was like a no-brainer when Malcolm brought this to our elders, and we said we end up saying like let's raise $100,000, and we'll give $50,000 to match what if our congregation raises $50,000, we'll match that. And so then we're like let's pitch to the congregation, let them, and the congregation when we said, but let's do it in 2 months.
Yeah, it's 2 months.
And we were like, is that too much? We're like, hey, this because we asked you, we're like, hey, when do you need it by? You're like, August, and we're like, well, this is May or June or whatever. And I was like, let's do it, and we'll see what happens. And we hit it like early second week of July.
Well, I remember, I think
Yeah.
it was the day I was actually technically on sabbatical last summer.
Yeah.
I was at Mosaic sharing a little bit about Creekside. You shared the vision about raising $100,000 by the end of the summer, and later I was like, you're crazy. I know I know a lot of the people in this church. They don't have this kind of money.
right.
This is a big church.
There's no way you're going to do this.
yeah.
And I think I was in Colorado, and we talked, and you're like, we already did it. And I was like, no, you didn't. There's no way. But there was a way.
Yeah.
And it was
There were people outside of the church who gave
Yeah.
Wow.
on our behalf to us for this project.
Yeah.
And I was
So I
like,
know your
yeah.
funding isn't over, and so I mean, just to encourage, when there's things like this that you're like, oh, I don't know how the Lord's going to do it, but like this is where it's like, people want to get behind when they see something exciting. And this is where it's like back to Creekside of like what we're so excited about being a part of. I think we're all itching to go like, we know the statistics in Waco. We know how bad it is. What can we do? And this was like, and my wife was on the board of Mission Waco for a few years and got to go down to Austin and see what it was mirrored after. And so I've had a little insight early on being I was already like, we should definitely be a part of this.
And back to what you said, Reverend Doctor, there is this sense, I love Eugene Peterson in his message translation in the Gospels when he talks about the incarnation, said that to describe the incarnation, that God took on flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And when I think about who the neighbors are out at Creekside Community Village, they're neighbors. They've moved into the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Some of them have significant history that is in church. And you might have a pastor that's living out there, but you also have somebody that's been far from the church because of traumatic events that's happened in their life where they haven't seen the church step up and help.
Yeah.
Or maybe that traumatic event happened at a church.
Yeah.
And so being very far from organized religion, and not just being fearful of it, but against it, is we're going to have people from every walk of life in between. And while I'm talking about it from more of a religious, spiritual angle, this is also about kinship. It's about friendship. We have about 20 to 30% of the folks that'll live out there are who we call missionals. And I always like to, missionals, we've got so much baggage and language around mission and missions and missional and missionary and all these things. Yeah. It's like I want to reclaim what this word missional means. To me, it is this incarnational living out of our faith. And it's doing it alongside of people. It's doing life with, not for. And that's a huge part of when you live alongside of somebody, you're there to listen when they have a terrible day or they need a ride. Or you're there to listen about when you had a terrible day or when you need a ride because your car broke down. And so it's this mutual living out, not just faith, but as humanity living together and working that out. And if it's from a perspective of faith or not, Mission Waco is a faith-based organization. Our strongest partnerships are with churches. This is also an opportunity to get people not just to give money to a project, but to connect them with a lot of folks who they probably won't have ever been connected with. Yeah. And in that process, learning from those individuals. We have a 56-bed emergency shelter, and we had a church group that would come in and lead devotionals. We do a chapel every night, 7 days a week. And they were coming in eventually I go down there probably once a quarter and just kind of check in with people. Hey, what's working? What's not working? Most people tell you they just want a popcorn machine. I'm like, okay, whatever. But they said, one guy said, hey, and I'd heard him lead a Bible study. This is a guy who's staying at the shelter. And he said, I was talking to my friends and we really would like a Bible study. I was like, what do you mean? That's what this is kind of supposed to be. He goes, well, it's one particular church. It comes twice a week. It's their interns. And it's kind of a turn or burn, fire and brimstone kind of sermon. And he said, most of the people who come to this are strong Christians, and we really want to talk about the minor and major prophets. Mm-hmm. Can you get that on the menu? Yeah. And so I had to sit down with this church and say, hey, and this was a handful of years ago. Yeah. And they just really, and subconsciously, there was an assumption that if you're staying at a shelter, you can't be a Christian. And it was just like, whoa. So there is still a lot of myth breaking to do. Yeah. And it's only going to happen when God gives you a relationship. Yeah. And you learn somebody's name. We talk a lot about making poverty history, but we don't talk a lot about making it personal. And so we can say we love the poor, but do you know their name? And that's a part of what Creekside is for the wider community and for folks at Mosaic who may not have a lived history of being unhoused, but now suddenly they have an opportunity to live out there. Yeah. Or if they can't live out there, it's not their stage in life, maybe they can come cook breakfast tacos and just get to know people. So, okay, so as y'all, we're going to try to land the plane here, which landing the plane with two pastors, and I'm a pastor by trade, is going to be a little challenging. I want to talk a little bit about theology and how you've seen the church miss the boat.
You want to land the plane?
Sounds like
just getting started.
This is takeoff time. Let's go.
I should have started with this. So keep it brief.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
How do you think the church has missed the boat? Because the reason why I framed that question is because I don't have the capacity. I grew up in a situation where it wasn't expected that you spent these kinds of resources of your own to help those around you. How do you think that's played out in American cultural Christianity? In the majority of our churches, again, there's lots of churches that, quote unquote, I say get it, right? It's so funny to me because it's like, what is there to get? You're supposed to love people. You're supposed to be like Jesus. This shouldn't be not a new issue at all. So talk to me a little bit about how you've seen that, maybe some of the reasons for it. And, that was probably in the back of your brain when you started a church. And how did you come from it from a different angle and make it look different? Or at least you hope to make it look different.
Would you like to start?
I'll begin briefly. I think one of the primary issues with particularly the American church is that it is in many ways beholden to mammon worship. So in Matthew 6:24, Jesus says you can't serve two masters. You'll either love one and hate the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve both God. And then he uses the Aramaic word mammon, which means riches or money. And so I think Jesus is right in saying that there are two entities essentially fighting for our allegiance, and it's the God of the Scriptures, and it's mammon or money. And the worship of mammon is also known as greed. And so much of our time is spent figuring out how we can amass money, cultural influence, political power for ourselves. When we're told, particularly throughout the New Testament, that all the resources that we're given are meant, insofar as we are given them to an extent that is more than we need, is meant to meet the needs. It's meant to meet the needs of others. That's just a fundamental assumption for me now. And one of the ways that I think becomes clear is, and this is just a Waco point, and it's difficult to say, but there should not be this much poverty in a city with this many churches. It just shouldn't be the case. Like that's an indictment on our communities, really. Because because it is a fundamental Christian ethical commitment to care for the needs of especially the poor. And so to see the kinds of numbers that we see, particularly in this city, of both hunger and lack of housing, I take that as an indictment of our church communities. And so because I look at the church, especially in the first few centuries, and one of the primary things that the people of God are known for is specifically their care for the needy. And that materially shapes the spaces that they're in, because love is fundamentally, according to the scriptures, material. And so yeah, I think the main reason why we don't see that is because a lot of us have fallen victim, not even fallen victim, in some cases rushed headlong into mammon worship.
There's a great book I read back in seminary from a guy named Rodney Stark, wrote The Rise of Christianity. And he talked about, not necessarily really from a Christian perspective, the book wasn't written from, but it was plainly and simply, I think, put out as a sociologist. This is how the church grew, is that there were needs around them, and they met those needs when those needs were not being met. And when there's famine, when there's always war, but certainly hunger and poverty and disease, that you had a group of people helping people. It didn't have to be more complicated than that, but that is what grew the early church. And you see it in New Testament scripture as a descriptor of what it's supposed to be. But then when you look at history to show how it actually grew, that's how it grew. So I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think one of the reasons, I'll give two, one of the reasons I think that it's not a reality as it should be. One, I do think there's this bifurcation between the physical and the spiritual, and that as churches, our sole job is to save souls.
Did you just use the word bifurcation? That was good.
Dichotomy. There we go.
I hear you using big words. I hear you using big words, Slim. All right. No,
Sorry, keep going in your serious train of thought.
I don't think anyone says this to you, do they? They assume it from you, and they're just shocked when it comes out of my head. Okay.
You're good, bro. You're good, bro.
Internalizing this. But I think the church, we think our sole job is to save souls, which, amen, hallelujah. I want more and more people to be baptized, and I want that. But I think it's not just to get people off of earth into heaven. It's to bring heaven here on earth. It's like the reversal of the kingdom coming now on earth as it is in heaven. And so wanting that to be seen here all amongst our community, that there is no needy among you, that is one thing I think the church is, it's like you asked what theologically. I think it's that theological point is now having ripple effects across the church. But I think the second thing is, going back to what you said earlier about just being near someone and the proximity, the power of proximity. One of John Perkins' big thing of relocation of his 3 R's. Seeing the neighbor you have needs and from afar is one thing. And so I think the church, when they aren't in the community and aren't seeing them as their neighbor, they're seeing them as those people over there. And so we're just going to go to the Myers Center or wherever, and we're just going to sing and try to save these souls. We're like, well, they're already saved. Versus like being in the community and going like, yeah, they do believe. They just have had a hard hand dealt to them. And so instead of seeing them as the other, that proximity allows you to go like, oh, I need to have some compassion and like, there's some nuance here. And there's the reasons. It's not because they are lazy that they're in this moment. There's been things that have happened to them.
Yeah. Well, I think we have sorry, go ahead.
No. Very, very briefly. Even that points to, I think, the kinds of assumptions that we are essentially taught about particularly those who are in need, that there's this assumption that they're in that position because they did something. And the reason why I'm not in that position is because I'm awesome and I worked really hard and I took advantage of the system and all that kind of stuff. All of that leads to the formation of a people who default to judgment as opposed to defaulting to mercy. Like the assumption ought to be, when I come into contact with somebody in need, that my first response is not, oh, what did they do to get them in that position? No. My first impulse ought to be to go to mercy. Now most of us don't do that because we're like, oh, well, what if somebody exploits me? And to that, the Lord responds, well, look, your Father in heaven cares about you. Don't worry about that. What's important is that you are the kind of person who reaches out with the kind of mercy that's been extended to you. And so particularly as the body of Christ, like that ought to be the first thing that somebody encounters when they encounter us. That they encounter somebody who forgives because they've been forgiven much. Somebody who extends mercy because much mercy has been extended to me.
Well, and I think it's a classic case of a microscopic view with a telescopic lens.
Oh,
Right?
Ooh.
You've got this very small view of what you think is going on, right? And you've got an opinion about it.
yeah.
But you're on social media, or you're not anywhere close in proximity to those who are struggling with being under-resourced or distressed communities.
Yeah.
Some of the hope that we even try to get our staff and certainly our volunteers not just trained in, but to fully understand, is we want to move people from having a perspective, especially for those who are unhoused, of what's wrong, moving from what's wrong with this person to what's happened to this person. And it's this step into Christ-like humility that is not asking the question of what did this person do, but what happened to them. And that begins to help humanize, and then you learn their story, you learn their name, you understand, you have a glimpse into the fact that a lot of us are not so far removed from our brothers and sisters that may stay at my brother's keeper. Which is a shelter, plug, 56-bed shelter for Mission Waco. That's for men and women, by the way. It's not just for the brothers. It's for the sisters, too.
Good.
But we hope to create a community of mutual learning where people just get to experience life together.
Yeah.
And in that process of learning more about someone's story, you may learn more about your story. I could tell you countless stories of folks that had some sort of traumatic family event that led them to where they are. We really, truly believe the leading cause of homelessness is this profound, catastrophic loss of family, which is why if housing alone could solve homelessness, we probably should have already been able to solve it. The government has in the past, not recently, but in the past, has poured millions and millions and millions of dollars into rapid rehousing. And that housing first model, it does help a lot of people and has helped a lot of people. But the housing first model also includes it's housing first along with these other things. It's supportive and it's permanent. So, all right, we're landing the plane now.
Let's do it. Let's do
So
it.
what's your last hot take? What's your last thought? Encouragement for the local church, the people here in Waco or around. We had a church from Connecticut actually raise $150,000, and they came and helped build a couple of the homes.
That's awesome.
So it's not just here in Waco. We have had quite a few churches. I had a church this morning that has 90 members, and they've committed $25,000 over 2 years.
Amazing.
It's incredible. And so we have had quite a few churches really step up and help, but there's still a whole lot more churches that haven't stepped up. And not all of them have the capacity to give, but all of us have the capacity to advocate and to pray for. So what's an encouragement or a challenge to the folks listening about Creekside Community Village?
Co-pastor?
I don't know how to get the churches who are not already participating. That is going to be the forever challenge I know you have of how do I get them to even listen? And so that's going to be something that I think maybe seeing evidence of it, which I'm excited that you already have some on site now. And so seeing and how that could work. But in terms of like the church, I would encourage the church to adopt what the book that we're taking our deacons through is the Practicing the King's Economy. And one, go through that book. But two, I feel like the underlying theme that is woven throughout that book is the theme of a potluck. And it's not just us going to these communities and going, how can I serve you and drop off this soup for you, and it's for you, but it's it's the potluck of everyone gets to bring something. Everyone's got value and dignity and will bring something of value to where, like, yeah, I might have brought the brisket, which I love making some good brisket, but I can't make that blueberry pie the way you make it, and so I need you to bring it. And so it's asking the community to say, let's all chime in. So whenever we do try to do things with the community of different socioeconomic levels, we invite the community to bring what they can to it. And I think obviously, I think it offers that dignity, but two, I think we all get the blessing from that.
That's good. Yeah,
and preach it until it becomes obvious, because this picture of the kingdom of God is something that, like I said, I mean, our greed veils this beautiful image, and we spend most of our time thinking about. I mean, I think about the kind of anxiety and worry that consumes so many people, especially just in thinking about, like, oh my goodness, I'm the only one who cares about whether or not my family survives, so I need to work myself into the ground so that my family can survive. One of the benefits of Christian community is that you are now embedded in a community where you have other people who actually care about whether or not you live or die.
That's right.
People who care about whether or not your children eat, like that, and that then frees you up. But the only reason that community exists is because of what Christ did on the cross.
That's right.
And because he sent the Holy Spirit to empower that community. And so people need to hear over and over and over again that a Holy Spirit empowered community is materially manifested in particular ways. And one of the most significant ways in which it is materially manifested is that it is a community that sees its own resources as fundamentally meant to meet the needs of others.
That's good. We often talk about when helping hurts. With a lot of our staff and our interns. We've got about 10 interns this summer, and they'll go through the book. In the book, the author talks about the fundamental broken relationship that humanity has with God. And then the broken relationship of self and identity and who we are or who we're not. And the broken relationship with creation that God has tasked us to steward. And then that broken relationship with community. And we see it very much on the surface with our community. You can read any of the news stations and hear that really quickly. Creation, we don't talk as much about, especially in Waco, being largely conservative. And then the identity of self, we kind of talk about that. We just don't have a framework to think about it. Most of the time we focus on that broken relationship between humanity and God. Which Mission Waco is a faith-based organization, as you said. It's central to why we do everything that we do. And so while Creekside is made up of, this isn't a bait and switch that you see a lot of times in ministries and call it missions, where come get this, but in order to get this, you got to say this prayer or read this pamphlet or read whatever. And so for us, it's more about this is why we do what we do. But the proclamation of the good news of Jesus Christ is a key element to everything that we want to be a part of and what we want to do. And it's more about when you talk to my grandmother, or my grandfather is a better example. You knew my grandfather loved to fish within 10 minutes of talking to him. It didn't matter. He could be talking about insurance sales, but you're going to hear about how he loves to fish and what he caught that weekend. And I feel like that's the gospel for me anyways. It's like, if I really love this, then in 10 or 15 minutes, I should hope that I'm talking about what I love and why we do what we do. So I can't help but reemphasize that to our listeners, because that's who we are as an organization, that God has given us the ability to love others because he first loved us. So, all right, well, guys, thank you so much for being with me. As two pastors and one sort of retired pastor, we could keep going, but thank you for your time. I know you're busy. Again, we've got Reverend Dr. Malcolm Foley, Pastor Slim. Thank you all for being with us on the 4th episode of It Takes a Village with Creekside Community Village. You can find this podcast on any of the ways that you currently listen to podcasts, but you'll also be able to find this on our social media, Mission Waco handles for Instagram and Facebook, as well as Creekside Community Village handles on Facebook and Instagram as well. So glad you could join us. Guys, thank you for being with us. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
You can follow us on Creekside Community Village social handles and where you listen to your own podcasts.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.